Hey, Steve Saretsky here. As always, there's going to be a couple blog posts to go with this video, so everything that I basically reference is going to be in the description below. I want to talk about a couple things, so I'm going to kind of go around on a couple subjects here, but basically, first off, there's a nice feature article on me on the Tyee. I want to thank them, but basically, bring that up. I'll put a link to that, but essentially, going through some of the comments and obviously reading it, and obviously you can't please everybody, right? So it was essentially an article on sort of my perspective on the market and sort of taking maybe an alternative approach, in the industry. And people going basically like, oh, this guy predicted this and that, and he was wrong, and da 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 da, and all this, and it's just like. Again, I just like to clarify here because I've never ever made any predictions, nor will I make any predictions. It's impossible to do. I can't time the market for anyone, and I do get a lot of requests. What should I do? Da, 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 da. I can certainly advise you, give you the numbers, let you make a decision, but I cannot, time the market for you and tell you, this and that. Being out there, I get a lot of people that send me messages, links to articles, etc. And I just had a guy send me all these articles from 2012, and it was the same arguments then, right? So it was 2012, Bank of Canada was coming out saying, debt levels, house prices too high, da 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 da. We got to hike our interest rates, and people were calling for a housing crash back in 2012, and here we are. 5 years later, and obviously it's still very much a bull market, and it's very much the same message coming out. I would say it's even more heightened now, but that's the context of it, right? So a lot of people probably took that advice back in 2012, and are probably kicking themselves, right? I know a lot of people did, but the fact of the matter is nobody can time it. So people that might sell today, it might be the best cash out of their life, but at the same time, this could be a continued bull market in the next couple of years, right? Like I just don't know. All I can do is say, hey, here's what I'm seeing. This is what's in the data. This is how I feel in the market, and then it gets interpreted, by people. So it's just funny. It's obviously someone that was commenting hasn't really looked into my stuff, or it's maybe watched one video and drawn their own conclusions from it. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I think everyone's entitled to their own opinions and stuff, but. Again, just talking about that, I was just speaking with Vice. They're doing an article basically about, again, this is why I like to clarify things, because they're doing an article trying to get my comments on, what would happen if the Canadian economy entered a recession, da 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 da, and what would it do for the housing market. And I said, well, obviously it would be bad. Canadian recession, especially with our debt levels, etc. But I was like, I don't know if that's going to happen, but it was that obviously if it happened, there would be an impact on the real estate market. So just like to clarify the context of where that's coming from. Again, everybody sort of has to formulate their own beliefs, decisions, and make an informed decision. That's everything I try to do with the content, is just try to put out the information. I think that there's a huge lack of it. There's a huge lack of really reliable data that is, isn't spun in some sort of way. And so the whole goal with that is just basically put out content. You can agree with it, disagree with it, but, just use it and formulate your opinions, right? Part of the reasons why I talk about, some of my concerns in the market is, sometimes it's not always being so bearish on the real estate market. It's almost on the Canadian economy. I just think that the emphasis that's put on real estate in order to continue to grow our economy, we just keep pumping out the debt. It's like a debt fueled boom, right? And then it really comes down to the central bankers. You can try to blame every other person, but it's just sort of the system that we're in. Historically we're at all-time record low. Never been here before in history. Record low interest rates, basically around the world. So for anyone to say, some people are saying, again in the comments, you sort of get different feedback, and people are saying, oh, this is sort of the new economy, this is the way the world's going to be moving forward in the next 20 years, everything's going to be debt driven, asset prices are going to continue to climb, and they may very well. I don't know. I'm not an economist, nor do I pretend to be. I simply provide the data, whether that's household debt, real estate prices, anything that might impact real estate markets positively or negatively. But again, I just encourage people to study up, right? That could be the fact, or it could be we do hit a debt ceiling. Danielle DiMartino Booth, who was an insider at the Federal Reserve. I just read a good article about her. She basically just like summarized, obviously the debt levels, the central bank policy, essentially saying that, low or household debt levels at the current level are increasing debt levels works as long as interest rates don't go up. And so that's why I don't necessarily buy the pretense that, there's going to be Federal Reserve's hiking, Bank of Canada is going to follow, or we're going to get up to, 3 or 4% interest rate. It's never going to happen. So there's just too much debt in the system, right? So and so she made a very good reference on that, because all these economists keep talking about debt service ratios, and it's sustainable because the debt service ratios have essentially plateaued over the last couple of years, which is great, but at the end of the day, you're going to continue to have, slow economic growth, and you can't hike interest rates because there's too much debt. So again, interpret as you wish. So that's just sort of a little background context on that. And then, again, just talking back into the markets, some of the froth, again, that I witnessed in the housing markets. And again, maybe this is froth that continues on for a couple more years or whatever. But some of the things that, again, that just sort of throw me off is I don't do a whole lot of work in areas in the Fraser Valley, whether it's Langley or Surrey, which have been out there recently with a couple investor clients. And, just some of the behavior that I'm seeing is just like I'm seeing the units that typically would not sell. They would take 6 months. Like, sellers would be begging for an offer. Again, in Langley, in these areas, they're selling in multiple offers, just being sold in a week. I've linked a chart to this. Langley condo prices, I believe, over the last year have been growing at 2.5% per month, and that's continuing into 2017. So condo prices are growing by 2.5% a month. That's like essentially 30% a year. So I don't know. Is that sustainable? Is there truly a land shortage in Langley? I just think this demand is yes, it's supply and demand, but where is the demand coming from? Is the demand sustainable? Again, interpret as you wish. That's just something I did. You go to these open houses, and it's just like you kind of like. I feel, because I'm very invested in these markets in terms of like studying them and what to look for. I just see some of this behavior, and it's just like, you go to an open house, you get there a couple minutes early, and there's already like 10 groups sitting there waiting to get in, and everyone's just sort of funneling through, right? And like, oh, when's offers? Again, for condos in Langley to be going up 2.5%. I can tell you condos in the Whalley area, which again, it's Whalley. They're up 27% year over year. These are places where people go to affordability. So, it's a lower income area. How high can these prices go? Does a 1-bedroom condo go to $350,000, $400,000? Where do we draw the line here, right? So in terms of what is sustainable, if we continue to see growth at 20, 25, 30, 35% year over year. So that's sort of where I'm at. Again, because people will justify Vancouver and say, well, it's Vancouver, land constraints, beautiful city, everyone wants to work here, live here. But then again, we start to move out into these suburbs where the price gains are even higher than in Vancouver. For me, I just look at that as, okay, maybe this isn't sustainable. And so that's what I just like to tell people, because I think a lot of people are buying in on the premise that prices are continuing to rise at this pace, when I think there's definitely a good possibility of some sort of pullback. Again, but I'm not going to put a timestamp on it or say it's going to happen for sure, because I don't know. Again, we're at a time when interest rates have never been lower historically. Economists, central bankers, hedge fund managers, I don't think none of them, they're all puzzled by what's happening, in this global economic environment. Nobody really knows what the road ahead is. It's certainly, again, it's unprecedented times where you have like record low interest rates, anemic growth, record high debt levels. We don't know. Housing is not just inflated in like I said, it's not just inflated in Vancouver or Toronto or in Canada. It's globally, right? You go over to Sweden, New Zealand, Australia, China. It's a very different context, right? So, and again, some people will say, "Oh, this is the new economy. Everything is debt fuel driven by central banks." Da, 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 da. I don't know, but anyways, that's the premise. I know it's sort of touching on a couple different topics, but basically, just wanted to get on that point. Is again, we don't know where the market's going. I don't know. I'm just trying to provide a different perspective. Trying to put out as much information as I can, and hopefully you can make an informed decision. Like I said, I definitely personally believe there's a lot of froth in this market. I don't see how prices continue to rise at 20-30% every single year, especially in the suburbs. To me, that just doesn't make that much sense. I certainly think that, I mean, as of right now, with the growth at 2.5%, there's nothing from stopping it to continue to rise, right? So unless we see further government policy intervention, some sort of economic shock, the runway is set for prices to continue to rise. The inventory is like, it's all-time lows. The demand is still there. The cheap credit is still there. The environment for prices to keep rising currently is still there. Again, so I don't know, again, if that's going to be further government intervention or whatever the case, whether it stems from, do banks eventually tighten? What happens with the home capital? Does it run through the system? There's so many variables. So again, I just hope that everybody sort of takes the information, funnels it in, and makes their own decision. And that's my 2 cents on it. Going to be probably put a couple links in the description below. And if you're not already subscribed, always appreciate the subscribe. And best place to converse with me is not only in the comments here, but actually on Twitter. That's where I do a lot of my research, and I put out a ton of content there. So it's at Steve Saretsky on Twitter. All right, chat soon.